Imagine being dragged from your mother's arms at age 8, trained to become the most lethal warrior in history, only to be locked in a courtyard and set on fire by the very empire you bled for. June 15, 1826. Constantinople. The air thick with smoke and screams, 6,000 men, warriors who had conquered continents, who had made emperors tremble, trapped like animals as flames devoured them alive. These weren't just any soldiers, these were the Janissaries, the Sultan's immortal guard, the most feared fighting force the world had ever seen, and their own Sultan had just ordered their execution. But how did it come to this? How did an empire betray its own invincible army? The answer begins centuries earlier with a chilling practice that would forge both legends and nightmares. Picture this: Ottoman soldiers storming through Christian villages across the Balkans, tearing boys, some as young as 7, from their families' arms. These children would never see their homes again, never speak their native tongues, never pray to their childhood gods. This was the devshirme, the blood tax, where Christianity's sons became Islam's fiercest weapons. These stolen boys were stripped of their identities, converted to Islam, and subjected to brutal military conditioning that would break ordinary men. They learned to fight with a ferocity that bordered on supernatural. They knew no loyalty except to the Sultan, no family except their regiment, no fear except dishonor. They became the Janissaries, meaning new soldiers. But they were so much more. They were ghosts of who they once were, reborn as the Sultan's unstoppable war machines, capable of conquering empires, until the empire decided they had become too powerful to live. Think about that one person at work or in your family who started as the biggest asset and slowly became the biggest problem. That's exactly what happened with the Janissaries, except this workplace was an empire and the HR issue carried loaded muskets. They were once the ideal soldiers, disciplined, loyal, terrifying in battle. The Ottoman state trusted them so much that they became the Sultan's personal guard, the iron wall between him and chaos. But power has a habit of changing people and institutions. Over time, the strict rules that made the Janissaries so sharp began to soften. They were supposed to be single, barracks-bound warriors who lived only for the Sultan and the regiment. Instead, many started marrying, opening shops, buying property. They ran coffee houses, joined guilds, invested in trade. In modern terms, imagine your country's special forces also owning half the businesses downtown and deciding who gets promoted in government jobs. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were a political and economic force, woven into every corner of city life. With money and influence came something even more dangerous, the realization that the empire needed them more than they needed the empire. When a sultan tried to cut their privileges or modernize the army, they didn't complain quietly, they revolted. Janissary uprisings meant streets full of armed men, ministers dragged out, reforms canceled, sometimes even sultans dethroned. The message was clear: you may wear the crown, but we hold the city. Meanwhile, Europe was racing ahead with modern armies and new weapons, while the Janissaries resisted almost every change that threatened their comfortable position. So put yourself in Mahmud the Q's place for a second. You're supposed to be ruler of a great empire, but your own elite guard blocks every attempt to save it and might kill you if you push too hard. In quiet rooms, behind thick doors, one brutal conclusion starts to form. The heroes of yesterday have become the obstacle of today, and if they can't be reformed, maybe they have to be removed. The only question is, how do you kill the monster you built without letting it kill you first? Have you ever wanted to get rid of someone you can't fire directly because they're too powerful, too connected, and could destroy you if you move wrong? That was Sultan Mahmud II's reality with the Janissaries. He couldn't just say, "You're done." These were the same men who had removed sultans before. One wrong step, and he would be the next body in the palace courtyard. So instead of attacking them head-on, he chose something much more dangerous. He decided to outplay them. Publicly, Mahmud started talking like a reformer. He said the world was changing, Europe had modern armies, and the Ottomans needed to catch up. He wrapped his plan in religious and patriotic language. This wasn't copying the West. It was saving the empire, defending the faith, protecting the future. His idea: create a brand new army, disciplined, modern, trained in European style. On the surface, that sounds normal. Every country upgrades its army, right? But behind the speeches, the real plan was sharper. Mahmud knew the Janissaries would see any new army as a direct threat to their power and privileges. He needed them to react exactly like they always did, by exploding in anger. While he quietly trained loyal troops and brought in artillery, he also gathered religious rulings and legal arguments. He was preparing a story the state could tell. These men aren't guardians of tradition, they're rebels against order and God. So when the first drills of the new army began, the Janissaries did what they always did. They banged their cauldrons, filled the streets, shouted that the reforms were an insult. They thought they were repeating their usual script: scare the Sultan, crush the reform, go home stronger than before. What they didn't see was that this time, the script had been rewritten without them. The city's mood was shifting, the cannons were already in place, and the reform they were fighting wasn't just about replacing muskets. It was about deciding who would live and who would burn when night finally fell. Imagine thinking you're about to scare your boss into backing down, like you've done 100 times before, and instead realizing, too late, that you've walked into your own execution. That's exactly what happened to the Janissaries on that night of fire. News spreads. The Sultan is pushing his new army reforms. The Janissaries do what they've always done. They gather at their square in Istanbul, overturn their huge cooking cauldrons, their traditional symbol of revolt, and flood the area with armed men. For generations, this has been their power move. Make noise, show force, terrify the court, and the Sultan caves. In their minds, it's business as usual. But this time, Mahmud II isn't trembling. He raises the sacred banner of the Prophet, a symbol so powerful that anyone opposing it can be branded an enemy of faith and state. Suddenly, the narrative flips. The Janissaries don't look like guardians of tradition anymore. They look like rebels against religion and order. Loyal soldiers, religious students, and ordinary citizens rally to the Sultan's side. The city that once feared the Janissaries now starts to turn against them. While the Janissaries shout and threaten, artillery is quietly moved into position around their barracks in the square. They're surrounded and don't even realize it. Then the order comes. Cannons roar, buildings explode, roofs collapse, fire spreads through wooden structures like dry grass. The men who once stood unshaken under enemy fire now find themselves choking on smoke, trapped in burning barracks, cut down as they try to escape the inferno. By morning, the count is brutal. Around 6 Janissaries dead, some burned alive, some crushed, some executed in the chaos that followed. The elite corps that once guarded the heart of the empire is gone in a single night of planned destruction. The Sultan calls it a fortunate event, a necessary act to save the state. But once an empire burns its own shield, what happens the next time danger comes from the outside? And what kind of wound does that level of betrayal leave on a nation's soul? Imagine cutting off the very arm that's been shielding you your whole life, just because it started disobeying you. That's exactly what the Ottoman Empire did when it chose to wipe out the Janissaries. In the days after the massacre, the state moved fast to control the story. Official decrees announced that the Janissary Corps was abolished forever. Their name was cursed, their banners seized, their cauldrons smashed. Surviving members were hunted down, exiled, or quietly executed. In mosques, preachers praised Sultan Mahmud II as a savior who had cleansed the empire of a corrupt, rebellious force. On paper, it looked like a clean, brave surgery. Remove the tumor, save the body. But real life is never that clean. For centuries, the Janissaries, weren't just fighters. They were shop owners, guild members, local power brokers, and familiar faces in the neighborhoods of Istanbul and beyond. Their sudden disappearance left empty shops, broken networks, and families without income or protection. Imagine waking up one week and half the people who ran your area's businesses, security, and behind-the-scenes deals were just gone. The shock didn't only hit the palace, it hit the streets. Militarily, the empire now had a shiny new European-style army. Uniforms, drills, ranks, modern weapons. Reformers were excited. It felt like the Ottomans had finally entered the modern age. But experience can't be manufactured overnight. The Janissaries had centuries of battlefield instinct, loyalty to each other, and a culture of war that couldn't simply be copied in a training manual. While the new troops were learning how to be soldiers, rival powers were already watching, testing, and waiting for moments of weakness. Politically, Mahmud II became stronger than any ruler in generations. There was no longer an armed corps capable of dragging a sultan off the throne. But that victory carried a dark message. If the empire could burn them, it could burn anyone. Trust between ruler and ruled was permanently scarred. So was this the moment the Ottomans saved themselves, or the moment they quietly started dying from the inside? And if one empire could kill its own shield, what other hidden betrayals are still buried in the stories history never properly told us? In the end, the story of the Janissaries isn't just about an empire and its army. It's about something much closer to us. It's about what happens when loyalty is taken for granted, when power stops listening, and when human lives become tools on a chessboard. Those boys were torn from their homes, reshaped into perfect weapons, celebrated as heroes, and then erased the moment they became inconvenient. Behind the banners, the cannons, and the grand words like reform and glory, there were real people who laughed, cried, doubted, believed, and died thinking they were serving something that would never turn on them. But it did. And that's why this story matters. Because history is full of moments just like this, where the strongest are sacrificed by the very hands they trusted, where the good of the state becomes an excuse for unthinkable cruelty, where the truth gets buried under victory speeches and pretty titles like auspicious incident. If this could happen to the most feared warriors of their age, what other stories have been cleaned up, rewritten, or completely erased? How many times has the world been told one version, while the real version burned with the people who lived it? If you felt that, if some part of you was angry for those boys or shocked by that night of fire, then don't let this be the last story you hear like this. This is just the beginning. On Swords and Stories, we dig up the battles, betrayals, and buried truths that textbooks skip. So if you want more real history, the kind that feels like a movie but actually happened, make sure you subscribe to Swords and Stories, turn on the notifications, and stay with me on this journey. Now it's your turn. Comment below and tell me what you want next. Another betrayed army? A king killed by his own guards? A forgotten massacre no one talks about? Drop your ideas in the comments, and I'll see you in the next story.